The 90s weren't just dial-up internet and boy bands. It was the decade when sci-fi pushed boundaries so far that governments literally locked films away. From virtual reality nightmares to dystopian visions that hit too close to home, these are the movies they desperately tried to keep from your eyes. 1. Event Horizon, 1997. A spacecraft returns from hell itself, bringing back visions so disturbing that studio executives panicked. Paul Anderson's space horror masterpiece was absolutely gutted before release, with over 30 minutes of the most nightmarish footage cut to ribbons. The story follows a rescue crew investigating a ship that disappeared into a black hole and returned with something malevolent on board. What terrified censors wasn't just the gore, it was the psychological horror of a ship literally possessed by an evil dimension. The infamous blood orgy scene, showing the original crew engaging in unspeakable acts, was cut down to mere flashes. Test audiences reportedly vomited and fainted during early screenings. Behind the scenes, the production was chaotic. The studio demanded cuts just weeks before release, forcing Anderson to deliver a neutered version. Paramount executives were horrified by the initial cut, calling it disturbing beyond belief. The deleted footage was reportedly so extreme that editor Martin Hunter claimed it made seasoned film technicians sick to their stomachs. Most devastating for fans, the original cut was stored in a salt mine in Transylvania, where it deteriorated beyond recovery. Only fragments survive. Today, the theatrical version is tame by comparison to what might have been, but still delivers cosmic horror that feels like Hellraiser in space. The director has repeatedly expressed his desire to release his true vision, but that nightmare fuel remains lost to the void of studio censorship. 2. Crash, 1996. Cronenberg's collision of technology and flesh sparked an international incident when it debuted at Cannes. Based on J.G. Ballard's novel, this sci-fi exploration of people aroused by car crashes wasn't just banned, it was condemned by British politicians who tried to prevent it from being shown without even watching it. The film follows characters who discover a fetishistic subculture of crash survivors who find excitement in automobile accidents and their resulting injuries. The United Kingdom saw Westminster Council ban the film outright, despite the British Board of Film Classification approving it. In the US, Ted Turner tried to prevent its release in theaters owned by his company, despite not having seen it. Critics were wildly divided. Roger Ebert called it challenging and dangerous, while others labeled it sickening garbage. What made censors freak out wasn't just the disturbing premise, but Cronenberg's cold, clinical approach that refused to moralize or condemn its characters. The controversy only escalated when it won a special jury prize at Cannes for audacity and innovation. Distributors in numerous countries demanded cuts, particularly for the infamous leg scar scene that pushed boundaries of what could be shown in mainstream cinema. Francis Barwick, chief censor for Australia, stated the film went beyond acceptability because it presented depictions of destructive behaviors as normal. Today, the uncut version can be viewed as Cronenberg intended, revealing a film less about deviant thrills and more about human disconnection in our technological age. Its clinical gaze at modern alienation proved to be decades ahead of its time. 3. Starship Troopers, 1997. Paul Verhoeven's military satire got mistaken for the very fascism it was mocking, causing censors worldwide to lose their minds. This $100 million blockbuster faced brutal cuts across Europe for its unflinching depiction of militaristic propaganda and extreme violence. Germany banned it for viewers under 18, claiming it glorified warfare and Nazi-like imagery. The UK demanded substantial cuts to violence, while Malaysia banned it entirely for promoting American military values. What made officials so nervous wasn't just the gore, but how effectively Verhoeven replicated propaganda, leaving many viewers unsure if they were supposed to cheer or be horrified. Behind the camera, Verhoeven deliberately styled the film after Triumph of the Will, using fascist imagery to create a society where everyone is beautiful, but their values are wrong. The irony? Many critics missed the satire entirely, with The Washington Post famously calling it fascist, while completely missing that this was the point. Even the studio marketing pushed it as a straightforward action film, undermining its satirical edge. The most controversial scene, where recruits are shown the effects of bug attacks on humans, was heavily cut in many countries. In Germany, the brain-sucking scene was removed entirely for theatrical release. The film's clever. Would you like to know more? Propaganda segments particularly unnerved censors in authoritarian countries. Today, Starship Troopers is finally recognized as brilliant satire, with its uncut version revealing Verhoeven's true masterpiece. A warning about how easily societies can slide into militarism through media manipulation. As Neil Patrick Harris struts around in an SS-inspired uniform, the message couldn't be clearer. 4. Strange Days, 1995. Catherine Bigelow's cyber noir thriller was deemed too dangerous for its first-person scenes of extreme violence. The film, set in a dystopian 1999 Los Angeles, follows an ex-cop who deals in illegal recordings of people's experiences, including their deaths. Censors worldwide panicked over its unflinching approach to virtual reality crimes. The MPAA initially gave it an NC-17 rating, forcing significant cuts to achieve an R. Countries including Germany and Australia required heavy edits, particularly to the film's opening sequence, where viewers experience a robbery through the perpetrator's eyes. What disturbed authorities most wasn't just the violence, but the way Bigelow put the audience directly in the criminal's perspective. Producer James Cameron defended the controversial squid sequences, saying they were meant to make viewers complicit in the voyeurism. But censorship boards weren't convinced. The film's release coincided with growing concerns about virtual reality technology, making its premise seem dangerously plausible to moral guardians of the era. Behind the scenes, Ralph Fiennes and Angela Bassett reported feeling deeply uncomfortable filming certain sequences. Critics were divided, with some praising its technological prescience and others condemning its grim nihilism. The Washington Post called it morally murky, while the New York Times praised its visceral power. Today, Strange Days is viewed as prophetic in its vision of body cameras, shared digital experiences, and police brutality. The uncut version, now available on streaming platforms, reveals Bigelow's unflinching examination of how technology allows us to experience the worst of humanity from a safe distance, until that distance collapses entirely. 5. Existenzo, 1999. Cronenberg's virtual reality nightmare arrived just as the Columbine shootings sparked a moral panic about media violence. The film follows a game designer who must enter her own creation to check for damage after an assassination attempt. What sounds like a standard sci-fi premise turned into a censorship battlefield. The movie was heavily cut in the UK and Australia for its disturbing fusion of technology and flesh. Japanese censors demanded substantial edits to the bioport scenes, where game pods connect directly to the human spine through an opening that resembles a bodily orifice. Even in the US, marketing was heavily restrained due to Columbine, with theaters reluctant to promote a film about virtual violence. What particularly disturbed authorities was Cronenberg's biomechanical imagery. The game pods made of synthetic organs and the guns made of bone and cartridge that fire human teeth were deemed too disturbing for mainstream audiences. The scene where Jude Law's character assembles a bone gun faced cuts in multiple countries. Critics like Roger Ebert praised it as deeply, wonderfully, seriously weird, while more conservative reviewers condemned its repulsive premise. The film's reception was further complicated by its release alongside The Matrix, which offered a cleaner, more palatable version of virtual reality that overshadowed Cronenberg's messier biological vision. Today, with the uncut version available, Existenz stands as one of the most prescient films about our relationship with technology. Its questions about reality versus simulation feel more relevant in our era of deepfakes and immersive gaming than they did in 1999. The film's central question, are we still in the game, now feels less like science fiction and more like existential dread. 6. Total Recall, 1990. Verhoeven's Mars adventure was too extreme even for its R rating. The original cut was slapped with an X rating by the MPAA, forcing significant edits to reach theaters. The story follows a construction worker who either discovers he's a secret agent whose memory was erased or is experiencing a schizophrenic episode from a botched virtual vacation. The violence was so graphic that over 40 seconds had to be cut, with the infamous elevator scene getting the harshest treatment. The original showed a much longer, more gruesome death for the villain's henchman. In Germany, the film was released only in a heavily censored version that removed nearly all graphic violence, while the UK demanded cuts to 15 scenes. What made censors particularly uncomfortable was Verhoeven's gleeful approach to violence. The three-breasted mutant became iconic, despite attempts to minimize her screen time in conservative markets. The scene showing Schwarzenegger removing a tracking device through his nose was trimmed in multiple countries, deemed too graphic for even adult audiences. Critics were divided, with the Washington Post calling it lurid and ludic, while others praised its blend of action and philosophical questions about memory and identity. Schwarzenegger himself pushed back against censorship, arguing the film's violence was stylized rather than realistic. Today, the uncut version reveals Verhoeven's full vision, a bloody, thought-provoking adaptation that's far closer to Philip K. Dick's paranoid themes than the neutered versions that played internationally. The restored X-rated cut includes extended fight scenes and more explicit violence that emphasizes the film's central question: is extreme violence ever justified, even in pursuit of freedom? 7. The Lawnmower Man, 1992. What began as a Stephen King adaptation became an acid trip so disturbing that the author sued to have his name removed. This virtual reality cautionary tale faced significant censorship worldwide for its hallucinatory imagery and disturbing transformation sequences. The film follows a scientist using VR to boost the intelligence of a gardener with intellectual disabilities, creating a digital god with deadly powers. The MPAA demanded cuts to achieve an R rating, particularly to scenes showing the protagonist's transformation into a digital entity. International versions faced even harsher treatment, with Germany and Australia requiring substantial edits to its psychedelic sequences. What particularly unnerved censors was the film's religious imagery, including a digital crucifixion scene that many Christian groups found blasphemous. Several countries banned the film outright for its sacrilegious content, while others demanded the removal of scenes showing the protagonist declaring himself God. Behind the scenes, the production was chaotic. The film used groundbreaking computer animation that consumed 50% of the budget but represented only 20 minutes of screen time. Stephen King was so horrified by the final product that he successfully sued to have his name removed from the title, claiming it bore no resemblance to his short story. Critics savaged it, with Roger Ebert calling it a dilution of potentially interesting ideas. Yet it became a cult hit on home video, where fans circulated bootleg uncut versions. Today, the director's cut reveals a much darker film than theatrical audiences saw, with extended virtual reality sequences that blur the line between transcendence and horror, asking whether technological evolution will save humanity or destroy it. 8. Johnny Mnemonic, 1995. Keanu Reeves's pre-Matrix cyberpunk adventure got butchered so severely that international audiences saw an entirely different film. Based on William Gibson's pioneering story, this tale of a courier with a data-packed brain implant faced heavy censorship for its violence and anti-corporate themes. The Japanese version was 103 minutes long, while American audiences saw only 96 minutes. European markets received even shorter cuts, some missing crucial plot points. What terrified studios wasn't just the violence, but the film's depiction of corporations controlling life-saving medicine, a message they feared would alienate advertisers in conservative markets. The infamous room service scene, where Reeves battles Yakuza assassins using a cybernetically enhanced bodyguard, was heavily trimmed in most countries. Japan ironically received the most complete version, despite being the setting for much of the film's corporate villainy. Dolph Lundgren's unhinged street preacher character had entire sequences removed, deemed too violent and sacrilegious. Critics demolished it, with the New York Times calling it barely coherent, unaware they were reviewing a butchered version. Gibson himself disowned the theatrical cut, saying it failed to capture his vision. Director Robert Longo, coming from an art world background, struggled with studio interference that demanded a more conventional sci-fi action film. Today, fans can finally see the Japanese cut that restores crucial character development and world building. What emerges is a flawed but fascinating film that predicted information overload, corporate control of medicine, and the dark side of the internet years before they became reality. In its uncensored form, Johnny Mnemonic isn't just cyberpunk nostalgia, but a warning about digital capitalism that hits harder now than in 1995. 9. Species, 1995. This alien thriller faced censorship not for its violence, but for its evolutionary premise that terrified religious groups. The story follows a human-alien hybrid, created from extraterrestrial DNA, who escapes confinement and seeks to mate with human males to produce offspring that could wipe out humanity. The film's combination of horror and sci-fi elements with intimate scenes caused censors to demand significant cuts. Several Middle Eastern countries banned it entirely for its immoral content, while religious groups in America protested theaters showing the film, claiming it promoted evolutionary theory over creationism. What particularly troubled censors was the film's unapologetic approach to natural selection. The alien character still operates on pure biological imperative, seeking optimal genetic matches without moral considerations. This Darwinian premise was deemed dangerous by conservative groups, who claimed it reduced human reproduction to animalistic behavior. Behind the scenes, the production faced constant studio interference. Director Roger Donaldson battled with MGM over the creature design, with H.R. Geiger's original concepts deemed too extreme for mainstream audiences. The screenplay underwent numerous rewrites to tone down the evolutionary themes that worried studio executives. Critics were divided, with some dismissing it as exploitation, while others praised its unique blend of sci-fi and horror. The Washington Post called it grotesque, while genre publications appreciated its bold premise. Despite the controversy, it became a surprise box office hit, grossing over $113 million worldwide. The uncut version, now available on streaming platforms, restores scenes that emphasize the film's central question. Is humanity's obsession with controlling nature through science creating the very threats we fear? The film's premise feels increasingly relevant in our era of genetic engineering and artificial intelligence. 10. Demolition Man, 1993. This Stallone-Snipes showdown in a sanitized future faced bizarre censorship for its political satire, not its violence. Set in a future where all bodily fluids, inappropriate language, and physical contact are illegal, the film became an unintentional victim of exactly the kind of censorship it was mocking. The MPAA initially gave it an NC-17 rating before cuts brought it down to an R. Internationally, it faced strange, selective censorship. Singapore banned it outright for its subversive messages about authority, while the UK demanded cuts to violence. Most bizarrely, the film's criticism of corporate control triggered actual corporate censorship when Taco Bell became Pizza Hut in international versions due to brand recognition issues. What particularly bothered authorities wasn't the action sequences, but the film's merciless mockery of political correctness and authoritarianism disguised as public safety. The verbal morality statute, ticketing people for cursing, became the film's most prophetic element, anticipating today's debates about speech policing. Behind the scenes, the production faced constant rewrites as studio executives worried about offending various groups. The Three Seashells toilet scene was nearly cut for being too crude, but became one of the most memorable moments. Critics were dismissive, with the Washington Post calling it Demolition Derby, failing to recognize its satirical intelligence. Today, the uncut version reveals a film that was disturbingly prescient. Its vision of a sterilized future where physical contact is forbidden, restaurants are corporate monopolies, and underground rebels live in sewers feels less like science fiction and more like a warning. As one character prophetically asks, "You can't take away people's right to be assholes." The film questions whether safety is worth sacrificing freedom. 11. Dark City, 1998. Alex Proyas's noir sci-fi masterpiece was butchered by New Line Cinema, who feared audiences were too stupid to understand it. This tale of mysterious beings who rebuild a city every night while altering human memories was considered too complex and philosophical for mainstream viewers. The studio forced Proyas to add an opening voiceover that spoiled the entire mystery in the first 2 minutes. They also demanded cuts to the dreamlike pacing, removing crucial scenes that explained the film's mythology. What scared executives wasn't the content, but the film's refusal to spoon-feed its audience, trusting viewers to piece together its puzzle. Internationally, it faced different challenges. Several Asian markets required cuts to scenes showing experimentation on humans, while religious groups objected to its Gnostic themes that questioned the nature of reality and creation. The film's dark imagery and bleak urban landscape led to marketing problems, with New Line unsure how to sell what executives called philosophical gibberish. Critics who saw early screenings praised its visionary style, with Roger Ebert naming it his favorite film of 1998. However, the studio's lack of faith led to minimal marketing and a box office disappointment. Behind the scenes, Proyas fought constantly with the studio, who wanted more action and less metaphysics. Today, the director's cut restores Proyas's original vision, removing the spoiler narration and restoring the film's mesmerizing rhythm. What emerges is one of the most unique sci-fi films ever made, a Kafkaesque nightmare about memory, identity, and power that influenced everything from The Matrix to Inception. Its central question has become more relevant in our digital age. If our memories can be manipulated, what makes us who we are? 12. Virus, 1999. John Bruno's deep-sea tech horror arrived just as the Y2K panic was peaking, making its digital infection storyline too terrifying for comfort. The film follows a salvage crew that discovers a Russian research vessel harboring an alien electrical entity that views humans as virus-infected machines that need fixing. The most controversial elements weren't the gore, but the human-machine hybrids the alien creates. Censors in multiple countries demanded cuts to scenes, showing humans fused with mechanical parts, particularly the sequence where a crew member's head is attached to mechanical spider legs. Germany required substantial edits before allowing its release, while Japan ironically banned several scenes despite the film's heavy use of Japanese characters and settings. What made authorities uncomfortable was the film's release timing during heightened fears about technology run amok. Coming just months before the millennium, its premise of artificial intelligence deciding humans were imperfect machines that needed upgrading struck too close to Y2K anxieties. Behind the scenes, the production was troubled. Director John Bruno, primarily known as James Cameron's visual effects supervisor, clashed with Universal executives who demanded more conventional horror elements. Star Jamie Lee Curtis later called it the worst movie I've ever been in, unaware that international audiences saw an even more incoherent version due to censorship. Critics savaged it, with the Washington Post calling it dead in the water, but failed to recognize its prescient warnings about artificial intelligence viewing humanity as flawed. Today, the uncut version reveals a film that, despite its flaws, asked important questions about technology's view of human imperfection that feel increasingly relevant in our era of advancing AI. 13. Judge Dredd, 1995. Stallone's dystopian law enforcer faced censorship for its political message, not just its violence. Based on the British comic, the film depicts a future where judges serve as police, jury, and executioner in a crime-ridden megalopolis. Its unflinching portrayal of authoritarianism made government censors deeply uncomfortable. Several authoritarian regimes banned it outright, with China refusing to show a film where law enforcement is portrayed as potentially corrupt. European markets required cuts to scenes showing police brutality, while Australia demanded edits to the film's violence. What particularly concerned censors was the film's ambiguous stance on whether Judge Dredd's methods were justified or horrifying. The scene showing the Block War faced the most cuts internationally, with its depiction of urban chaos and heavy-handed police response deemed too realistic. The sequence where Rico tests the ABC robot on corrupt judges was heavily trimmed in most markets, removing graphic depictions of law enforcers being executed. Critics were harsh, with Roger Ebert calling it a mess, but missed how the film's critiques of police overreach and surveillance states would become increasingly relevant. Behind the scenes, director Danny Cannon battled constantly with Stallone, who wanted a more heroic portrayal of Dredd that contradicted the comic's satirical origins. Today, the uncut version reveals a film caught between Hollywood star power and the source material's darker satire. While flawed, its warning about trading liberty for security resonates more strongly now than in 1995. As surveillance technology advances and police militarization increases, Judge Dredd's tagline, "In the future, one man is the law," feels less like fiction and more like a warning. 14. Universal Soldier, 1992. Roland Emmerich's sci-fi action film about reanimated super soldiers faced unexpected censorship for its anti-military themes. The story follows two Vietnam soldiers killed in combat, resurrected decades later as part of a secret government program. What seemed like a straightforward action movie hit a nerve with military censors worldwide. Germany banned it for viewers under 18, while South Korea demanded cuts to scenes showing American military misconduct. Several Middle Eastern countries banned it entirely for its disrespectful portrayal of fallen soldiers. What concerned authorities wasn't just the violence, but the film's premise that the military would exploit dead soldiers as weapons. The scene showing Jean-Claude Van Damme's character recovering memories of war crimes faced the most international cuts. The flashback sequence depicting American soldiers committing atrocities in Vietnam was removed entirely in several Asian markets. Even in the US, military consultants withdrew support during production over concerns about the film's message. Critics dismissed it as mindless action, failing to recognize its subversive commentary on military ethics and PTSD. The Washington Post called it brain dead, unaware that international audiences were seeing an even more sanitized version. Behind the scenes, Emmerich fought constantly with Carolco Pictures over the film's political undertones. Today, the uncut version reveals a film that, beneath its action exterior, asks uncomfortable questions about military experimentation and the exploitation of soldiers. As military technology advances toward enhanced soldiers and autonomous weapons, Universal Soldier's central premise feels increasingly plausible, making its warning about the dehumanization of warfare more relevant than ever. 15. Mars Attacks, 1996. Tim Burton's alien invasion comedy faced bizarre international censorship for mocking political leadership during tense times. This star-studded satire of 1950s B-movies showed Martians decimating world leaders and landmarks, while humanity fumbles its response, a premise that didn't sit well with authorities worldwide. Several countries with authoritarian regimes banned it outright for its depiction of incompetent government officials. The scene showing the annihilation of Congress was cut in multiple countries, while others demanded the removal of sequences showing the president's ineffectual response. China refused to allow its release, citing disrespect for government institutions. What particularly troubled censors wasn't the violence, but Burton's merciless mockery of military and political leadership. The sequence showing world leaders being tricked into believing the Martians come in peace was deemed dangerous by several governments concerned about public trust in authority figures. Behind the scenes, Warner Brothers executives worried about the film's dark humor and high body count, particularly the gleefully nihilistic ending where most of humanity is wiped out. Critics were divided, with some praising its anarchic spirit, while others found it too mean-spirited. The film's box office disappointment was partly due to international censorship limiting its release. Today, the uncut version reveals Burton's true vision, a satire not just of alien invasion movies, but of how leadership crumbles under genuine crisis. Its depiction of politicians more concerned with optics than survival feels eerily relevant in our era of media-driven politics. The film's central joke, that humanity's salvation comes not from leadership, but from unexpected sources, carries a subversive message that censors recognized as potentially dangerous. 16. Fortress, 1993. Christopher Lambert's prison break thriller was deemed too prophetic about surveillance society. Set in a future where having more than one child is illegal, the film shows a couple imprisoned in a privatized high-tech prison with behavior control implants and constant monitoring, a premise that made governments nervous. The MPAA initially gave it an NC-17 rating before cuts brought it down to an R. Singapore banned it outright for its anti-family planning message, while China refused its release due to population control themes. What concerned censors wasn't just the violence, but the film's critique of government reproductive control and privatized incarceration. The scenes showing the intestinator implant that causes crippling pain when prisoners misbehave faced the most cuts internationally. The birth scene in the prison was heavily trimmed in conservative countries, deemed too politically charged in nations with strict population controls. Even the prison break sequences were edited in some markets to remove examples of defeating surveillance systems. Critics largely dismissed it as B-movie fare, missing its prescient warnings about privatized punishment and reproductive control. Behind the scenes, director Stuart Gordon battled with distributors who wanted a straightforward action film rather than social commentary. The film's Australian production allowed for more extreme content than a typical Hollywood studio would permit. Today, the uncut version reveals a film that, despite its exploitation trappings, asked important questions about surveillance, private prisons, and bodily autonomy. As facial recognition technology advances and reproductive rights face new challenges, Fortress feels increasingly relevant. Its vision of a prison where crime does not pay because corporations profit from punishment now seems less like fiction and more like business model innovation. 17. Split Second, 1992. Rutger Hauer's dystopian cop thriller predicted climate disaster so accurately that it made environmental censors nervous. Set in a flooded 2008 London devastated by global warming, the film follows a detective hunting a mysterious killer that may not be human. Its environmental message faced unexpected pushback. Several oil-producing nations demanded cuts to dialogue, explicitly blaming fossil fuels for the flooding. The UK required edits to scenes showing London underwater, concerned about tourism impacts. What made authorities uncomfortable wasn't the monster or violence, but the film's matter-of-fact presentation of climate disaster as inevitable. The opening sequence showing statistics about rising sea levels and carbon emissions was removed entirely in several markets. Scenes emphasizing that government inaction caused the flooding were trimmed in countries with poor environmental records. The film's vision of wealthy elites living normally while the poor wade through flooded streets struck too close to home for comfort. Critics focused on its horror elements, largely missing its environmental warnings. The Washington Post called it waterlogged alien, failing to recognize its prescience about climate change. Behind the scenes, director Tony Maylam fought with producers who wanted to minimize the climate messaging in favor of more monster action. Today, the uncut version reveals a film that, beneath its sci-fi horror exterior, delivered one of the earliest mainstream warnings about climate crisis. Its flooded London streets, once considered far-fetched for 2008, now feel eerily plausible as sea levels rise. The film's central message, that humanity ignored warnings until it was too late, carries more weight now than when censors tried to suppress it in 1992. 18. The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1996. Marlon Brando's final sci-fi film was butchered not just by studios, but by moral censors worldwide. This adaptation of H.G. Wells's classic novel about a scientist creating human-animal hybrids touched nerves about genetic engineering just as real-world cloning debates were beginning. The film faced cuts in multiple countries, with religious groups particularly offended by its depiction of man playing God. Germany required edits to scenes showing the House of Pain, where Moreau conducts his experiments. Several Asian and Middle Eastern countries banned it entirely for blasphemous content. What alarmed censors wasn't just the grotesque hybrids, but the film's philosophical questions about what defines humanity. The scene showing Moreau conducting a disturbing birth of a new creature faced the most cuts internationally. Sequences showing the hybrids worshipping Moreau as a god were removed in religious countries. Even the creature designs were modified for some markets to appear less human-like and thus less theologically problematic. Behind the scenes, the production was infamously chaotic. Original director Richard Stanley was fired 3 days into shooting, with John Frankenheimer taking over. Brando's erratic behavior included refusing to learn lines and suggesting bizarre character choices. Val Kilmer reportedly caused constant problems, with tensions so high that Frankenheimer later stated, "I will never work with Val Kilmer again." Critics savaged it, with Roger Ebert calling it a mess, unaware that international audiences were seeing an even more incoherent version due to censorship. Today, the film's warnings about genetic engineering gone wrong feel disturbingly relevant in our CRISPR era. Despite its troubled production, its central question remains powerful. In creating new life forms, where do we draw the line between human and animal? 19. Gattaca, 1997. Andrew Nicol's genetic dystopia was deemed dangerous propaganda against biotechnology. Set in a future where genetic engineering creates a new class system, the film follows a naturally conceived invalid who assumes the identity of a genetically perfect valid to achieve his dream of space travel. The film faced surprising resistance from biotech companies, who pressured distributors to minimize its release. Several countries with active genetic research programs required disclaimers before screenings. What concerned authorities wasn't violence or content, but the film's suggestion that genetic manipulation could lead to discrimination and loss of humanity. The scene showing the 12 Fingers pianist particularly troubled censors, as it suggested genetic perfection might eliminate the very traits that make art and innovation possible. Sequences showing genetic discrimination in employment were trimmed in countries with lax privacy laws. Even the film's marketing was restricted in several Asian markets with active biotech industries. Critics largely praised it, with Roger Ebert calling it one of the smartest and most provocative of science fiction films. But the film still underperformed at the box office, partly due to marketing constraints. Behind the scenes, director Andrew Niccol battled with Columbia Pictures, who wanted a more action-oriented film with a clearer villain. Today, Gattaca is recognized as prophetic, addressing ethical questions about genetic selection that have become reality. Its warning about a society that reduces humans to their genetic code feels increasingly relevant as genetic testing becomes commonplace. The uncut version, now available on streaming platforms, reveals a film that was never really about the future, but about the choices we're making right now. 20. Existenz, 1999. Cronenberg's second virtual reality nightmare of the decade pushed boundaries too far for comfort. Released just weeks after The Matrix, but developed independently, this film about game designers who can no longer distinguish reality from simulation was deemed too dangerous during growing concerns about video game influence. The film arrived just as the Columbine High School massacre sparked a moral panic about violent games. Several countries banned it outright, citing concerns about its blurring of reality and fantasy. Germany refused to certify it for anyone under 18, while Australia demanded significant cuts. What troubled censors wasn't just the violence, but the film's suggestion that reality itself might be unreliable. The bioport scenes, showing game ports installed at the base of the spine, faced the most cuts internationally. The sequence showing a gun made of bone and cartilage that fires human teeth was heavily trimmed in most markets. Even the film's dialogue about losing track of reality layers was modified in translations to make it less disturbing. Critics were divided, with some praising its philosophical depth, while others found it repulsive. The film's release was overshadowed by The Matrix, which offered a cleaner, more accessible take on similar themes. Behind the scenes, Cronenberg refused compromises, telling producers, "This is a film about penetration. If that bothers you, we shouldn't be making it." Today, the uncut version reveals a film that was ahead of its time, asking questions about our relationship with technology that feel increasingly urgent in our era of immersive gaming, VR, and social media reality bubbles. Its closing line, "Are we still in the game?" has become not just a cinematic question, but an existential one for a generation increasingly unable to distinguish between digital and physical existence. From corporate censors to government bans, these films survived attempts to silence their visions. But were they really dangerous or just too honest about where technology was taking us? As you stream these once forbidden movies tonight, ask yourself, were censors protecting society or just delaying warnings we needed to hear? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us which banned sci-fi masterpiece hit too close to home.